Hello guys, welcome to today's Semrush webinar. I see William Rock is already in the chat, nice and early. So today's webinar, I'm going to be hosting David Amerland, and the topic of discussion today is behavioural marketing. So David has been a guest on a webinar I've promoted before, which I thought was pretty exciting, great points of view, different way of looking at things. I hope that's not offensive to say, David. Can you tell the guys a bit about yourself? I will tell you guys that if you've read the book, The Sniper Mind, that's David. I'm sure loads of you know who he is and he doesn't need an introduction. But for anyone who doesn't know David, please do tell him about yourself.
Thank you, Craig, and it's really good to be here. Okay, a little bit about me. I usually write about search and online marketing and social media and business communication. And lately, I've been doing a lot of discussion on behavioral marketing and neuroscience and how that surfaces a lot of the impulses and motivation we have at the purchasing decision. And I've spent 3 incredibly long years talking to neuroscientists and marketers and snipers, bringing all those things together for my last book.
It's, yeah, you literally brought in a real sniper, which was, you know, sometimes when someone like me who doesn't, you know, I didn't know you at the time, and you know, I was like, Jesus, he really has brought a sniper, a guy who's actually worked out on the field. So it was amazing to get those insights. I found it very interesting how you take that from, you know, that particular field and implement it into business life. It was very interesting to say the least.
Yeah, that was Errol Dobler, and yeah, he's amazing. I mean, he's been in places which we usually see in the movies, action movies. So he's an amazing guy.
Yeah, that's exactly the right what to do. It's just things that, you know, I'm sitting in a webinar going, yeah, it's Semrush, blah blah blah. Never thought I'd ever share a webinar with a guy that's actually laying those trenches, doing some of the stuff that Errol has done. So yeah, I found it very, very interesting. So guys, today we're obviously going to be talking about behavioural marketing, and I'm sure David will surprise. He's not got any snipers lined up today, but I'm sure the insights and stuff will be equally as interesting. So make sure that today you do put your questions in the chat. On YouTube, I will certainly be asking David as many of those questions as I possibly can at the end of the webinar. It's not often we get guys with a sniper mind, and that's a bit cheesy actually. I'll take that one back. But yeah, you want to take full advantage of David's experience and how David you know, thinks about things. So to, you know, take full advantage of that and put your questions in the chat, and I will certainly get as many asked as I possibly can. But we do have a few more minutes. I'm just checking how many people are coming in. Quite a lot of people there, quite a lot of well-known names. Zara Altair, Gina Fidel. So we've got quite a lot of people in the webinar chatting already. But David, just while we're waiting for other people to join, how did the Sniper Mind go? The book sales, did it all go well?
It's going really well. It's been picked up already by Book Authority on its ebook format. And as those of you who don't know, Book Authority is an entirely independent organization. They look at sentiment about a book, they look at sales, they look at engagement, interaction, content, all those things. And then they try to they have an algorithm, and that gives them the value of the book for the audience. And it's already been picked on a list, which is really good because it hasn't yet been a year since publication. It's been translated into Chinese. It came out about a month ago now, which is brilliant. And there's an audiobook for that as well, for the English version. So yeah, it's really exciting.
And whose voice is on the audiobook? Is it something that's got your voice on it, or is it?
No, it's Jonathan Cowley, if I remember correctly, his last name. He's an actor, and he's absolutely brilliant. We had a very small frame of time to actually do it. do it in. And the options were I were to sit down and read it, and then it takes a lot of goes, a lot of editing, because I'm not a professional reader, and then it has to be edited and reshot, or we had to get somebody who knows how to do it. So we got about 4 or 5 people who tested for it, and Jonathan's brilliant. He's absolutely fantastic, and yeah, he blew me, he blew my mind when he sent in the segment that I used to read, and I agreed pretty much immediately. And since then, everybody who's heard the book says he's really, really good.
Yeah, it's one of those things. I don't know if I could ever sit and be able to read out a book without any, airs or pauses or swear words.
Your voice going hoarse.
And yeah, it's certainly it's. I think it's one of those jobs that would be. It seems a lot easier than it actually would be to. And I think, did you say it took you something like 3 years to write that book?
That's right. Yeah, I mean, it started out as an idea. It started out as an article in Forbes, and from there we sort of thought, is there a book in it? And I got into the research, and I started talking to neuroscientists and snipers, and then the whole thing sort of came together. But there, it was a lot deeper than I expected, and it could have been double the size. It's about 400. It's over 400 pages, but it could have been 800, and I would still have material for it.
Perfect. Talking about material, we now have over 100 live viewers, so I think now is about the perfect time for people to see the man that they're here to see. So if you want to crack on, David, and pass your words of wisdom, I will certainly be collecting the questions on.
Great. Okay, thank you. And let's start with the obvious. And I never use slides in these presentations, and this is by design. I think that slides kind of get a little bit impersonal because you're looking at the screen, you're sort of squinting to make out what the things are, and then you hear a voice behind the slides explaining that, and then it becomes sort of a little bit weird, at least for me. And this is a personal choice. I'm not judging anybody else. So this is a very personal medium, and we're remote from each other, and it's important that you actually can see me, hear me, see my expressions, and as I speak, and sort of make a judgment call from there. So I do have a narrative, however, and I use narratives for a very precise reason. When we have oral communication, the way our brains are structured to absorb information require a ready-made story. And this is important for you to remember in terms of your marketing as well, and any kind of presentations that you make in any kind of a big audience format. Evolutionary, our brains are adapted to take stories apart, find out the salient points, keep them in our memory, remember how we feel, how the story made us feel, and go from there. So I will have a narrative to tell you. But before we even start with that, I'm going to start with a truth. And it's not the truth I intended to start with. So this is a revelation to me as well as you. And the truth is, I really don't want to be here right now. And at least I didn't until I started. But I'll tell you why. It's Thursday. I've been traveling a little bit. I've got a few articles to finish. I've got a book proposal, which is about a week late. I've got 3 client emails, which I haven't replied to for the last 5 days, and they're hanging there. And I've got a couple of other things which are related to my SMXL appearance in Milan, and they're expecting material from me. And I've done 0 about. So all this pressure started piling up, and I have this, obviously. So it piles up and piles up, and the easiest thing is you know what happens when you get pressure in your brain. Your brain wants to shut it out. It wants to shut down and make it go away. Easiest thing in the world. I could have sent an email to Anton, and Anton is the organizer. We never get to see, but he makes everything happen, and he's from Semrush. I could have sent him an email saying, oh, you know what, my internet connection blew up, my dog ate the cable, my grandmother is ill, or any of those things. Luddites have abducted me, and I can't make it. And I don't get paid for this. There's no contract in any way, shape, or form. So it wouldn't be any sort of earth-shattering moment. Yet here I am, still feeling the pressure at the back of my mind. And right now, because we're here, it doesn't even sort of compute. And here you are. And the question here is why? Why is this happening? And I'll tell you, and the only person I can speak about with 100% clarity about this is me and my own motivation. And the reason I am here is because I know Anton. Because I know him and I know how professional he is, I know that for him, this is a job, it's a paid position he has. He makes all these things happen, and it takes a lot of work to actually pull it off. So essentially, if I'd pulled out, he would have been left in a bit of a pickle, to use a colloquialism. And even though I would have been off the hook, I wouldn't have felt right. And this is important. This is something you need to bear in mind, because it's as revelatory to me as I hope it is to you as we move forward. So basically, I'm here doing this because I know Anton and because Anton asked me. And even though I agreed with this about 2-3 months ago, which at the time seemed like a good idea because all these pressures around me weren't there back then, it's the connection with him that actually is making it happen today. So with that truth, bear it in mind, it'll be important later on. We move into the narrative which I have prepared. And it's a narrative about a man who wants to buy a sword. He knows the sword is important. He knows that his life might rely on it. So he wants the most expensive sword money can buy. As value judgments go, this is not a bad one, because if your life depends on a sword, this is exactly what you need. He goes into a swordsmith. Swordsmith has all sorts of swords. He says to him, I want the most expensive sword you have. The swordsmith tries to ask him a few questions of how he's going to use it, how good he is with it, etc. But the guy has none of it. He's not really. He's focused on buying the sword. He knows what he wants. He has the money for it, so price is not an object. And he goes. He says he picks the most expensive sword. It's amazing sword, gold handle, rubies on the hilt, pattern on the blade, etc. And he pays for it. Guy wraps it up. Off he goes. The swordsmith's assistant, who witnessed all this, turns around and says to the swordsmith, "Whoa, that was the easiest sale we've ever made." And the swordsmith says, "Yeah, it was. We made a good sale, and I think we've just lost our best customer." Keep this in mind, because it has a lot of the hallmarks which we're going to talk about as we move forward. We know from neuroscience that essentially when we make a decision, we think we're rational beings. We think we're making a decision based on logic, but that decision is always made emotionally, and then we use logic to justify it. The area we're in, the area we're working in right now, all of us, whether we like it or not, is behavioral economics. And behavioral economics essentially is a field of science that uses psychological insights to try and understand human behavior in order to understand why certain specific choices are made. Now, this is totally different to what we had before, because for the entire 20th century, and even for the first part maybe of the 21st century, we were talking about human economic behavior. And human economic behavior assumes that we're completely rational beings. So therefore, everything which we do is motivated by our own self-interest. It sounds logical enough, right? If it's good for me, I'm going to do it. Therefore, there's a logic to that. But this is not how we operate. A lot of the times we don't operate to our own best interests. A lot of the time we don't make the right choices. And pretty much all of the time we happen to be irrational, even though we dress it up rationally. And case in point, what I told you earlier about the truth about how I did not want to be here today, right now. I felt the pressure, and it was getting too much, and I had to sit down and analyze it. I thought, I've got to do this, and these are the reasons I need to do it. And I had to tell myself why in order to get some of the pressure off. So essentially, we don't always understand why something motivates us. So in order to understand how all this comes together, in order to go back to the choice of the sword from an emotional point of view, the person who bought that sword assumed that the best sword that money could buy would be the best sword to protect his life. This is a relatively logical decision, but it's driven by an emotional one. It's driven by the willingness or the drive to actually have the means to survive. The means to survive, survival in itself, is one of the primary drivers that we have in any kind of behavioral context that you can imagine. It doesn't matter how complicated it seems. It doesn't matter how safe it might be. It doesn't matter how black and white the choices are. It's always driven by our need to survive. And that's how our brain makes the emotional decisions that are available. The brain uses one more element of primary programming, which is the energy available. So if for me and you to survive, for instance, we have to do something which is incredibly complex and drains us completely of energy, we would be disinclined to do it all the time. And because we can't die off or die out, we would look for shortcuts in what we do. And that also begins to give you a little bit of an insight of how we operate in the marketing world. Essentially, as marketers, as business people, indeed, as people living life, we look for shortcuts which will give us the maximum return for our investment of energy. So the ROI, which we talk about so many times in a corporate setting, put up in pie charts, and we proudly explain how much it is every time, is something which is primarily driven by those two things: the need to survive and the need to conserve energy while we do so. Because it's illogical to survive when you have no energy after that to do whatever you need to do. So back to the man with the sword, he decided in his mind, logically enough, that the most expensive sword would be the best sword possible. Otherwise, why is it so expensive? So he conflated the price of a weapon with its ability to enable him to survive, and he went for that, which is the choice he made. And he was so fixed in that, so fixated by that belief, that he was unwilling to listen to the swordsman, to the swordsmith, who was actually the master or the person who's most suitable in giving the advice. That's a kind of behavior which we engage frequently when it comes to things, when it comes to purchasing decisions, when it comes to marketing choices, when it comes to the way that we actually present things. And I have a pet peeve here, which is a classic example of this. And you probably remember this, those squeeze pages that you used to see on the internet, that there was a page that used to sell you something, and as you scroll down, it would have some kind of testimonial, and they would say in big red letters, still not convinced, and we throw in something else which ups the value, because you buy this it's $99.99, but for 10 days only, there's a counter, counting down, it's $45.99, and we throw in another $100 worth of extra stuff, and a little video to tell you how great it is, and then you went down to the bottom where you had to pay for it. From a marketing logic, this makes sense. There's a product. Assuming the product has some kind of value, instead of being completely useless, it takes you through a step-by-step process, which gives you testimonials, rightly, whether they're true or not, it doesn't matter. It gives you some technical materials. It gives you a price motive, so it gives you a discount, it gives you a limited amount of time to actually make use of that discount in order to make you feel special and feel a sense of urgency. So it presses the psychological button, and then it adds an extra value on top of that, which is about 2-3 times the price you're going to pay, so that you feel you're actually getting a great deal. So logically, it pushes all those buttons. And my pet peeve on this is that it is complete rubbish, because it tries to use human psychology to push us emotionally to make a decision that we wouldn't normally make. And it's wrong. It also doesn't work. And you'll say, well, why doesn't it work? Well, these pages, and they were pioneered by Jonathan Milner, I think his name is, when back in the early days of the internet. It started around 1992, and what he basically did is he took the hard sales push approach of a salesman and digitized and put it on the web. They worked in the beginning because there's nothing else there and we had to get something. They worked because they potentially got a small slice of people who were already on the edge of desperation, looking for a product that would give them a shortcut. And here's the trigger word on this, and they went for it. And they went for it on the assumption that, hey, it might work. And secondly, it's not a massive investment of money. And typically these things never went for more than $50. So they played on desperation. They played on people who were already half convinced, and they triggered it by essentially letting them know it's a great deal, and here's something that would save them. And they was playing on their emotions. All these things reveal, and we go back to the story of the swordsman, that the things which actually make sense to us, or we think make sense to us, don't when they come from a deeply emotional space which we haven't analyzed. So the question is, okay, what does that leave us in terms of marketing? How does that leave us in terms of sales? And how does that affect us in terms of decision-making process which we make? And here are 3 things which actually happen. First of all, marketing is changing, because if we just use the traditional techniques which are used to date in terms of price cutting, promotions, long squeeze pages, which thankfully have disappeared because they don't work in search, high pressure points like countdown counters, which gives us so many minutes to actually make a decision. These work emotionally against the person now because we resist them. We resist them because from a broader perspective, we all live in an emotional space where we can see from different sides how things work. That knowledge allows us to take that step back and actually think, okay, this is a psychological trigger, this is a psychological push. It's not going to actually work for me anymore. For marketing, it also changes the game because the traditional tools which we had as marketers also begin to not work as well. Because the squeeze pages, for instance, don't work. Traditional marketing, which used to either sex up a product or play on the risk factors or play on some specific association that was evidently false, but we still used it because it sold, they don't work either. So marketing now has become a lot more detail driven. It has become a lot more costly in terms of expertise and time and approach because the audience is resistant to these things. The question to this is, okay, if the audience is resistant, what actually works? How do we make it happen? And we make it happen the same way that I actually made the decision to be here tonight. There has to be the kind of connection which allows us to empathize with the person we are actually dealing with and make a decision which benefits us mutually at some level. So if I didn't know Anton, I wouldn't be here. If you don't connect with a brand at a human level that begins to represent your values, you don't actually want to do business with them. If you don't connect with a page on the web, which you've seen at a level that actually resonates with what you believe in, you are unwilling to give it your time and attention because both of those things are expensive. So now, in order to get that resonance, in order to get that connection, in order to get that human response, we have to be able to humanize our digital efforts. And that sounds like a contradiction in terms, but it isn't really. Because essentially, in order to humanize those efforts, we need to understand how we operate. We then need to quantify those steps and begin to put them in place. And I usually give a classic example here, which is Amazon, which to some extent is the most is the poster child for facelessness and corporate behemoth size. And yet, when you go to a web page to buy a product, that page tells you when you looked at the product before, if you have bought it before, what other products you've purchased in relation to that. So essentially, they have thought very carefully about how a human person who kind of knows you would give you the extra information that would make that purchase decision easier, even if many times the purchase decision you make goes against their own interests in that you choose not to actually buy what you want and go and look at something else. So that kind of approach shows that the connection has value for the company at a human level, even if they use digital tools. The challenge now, and it's a huge one, is that we work in a world that is increasingly automated. We work with chatbot assistants sometimes. We work through pages that have been search engine optimized to the gills. We work through pages that have product value primarily, and they need to call to action, and we need that call to action to work. And we work through campaigns, which could be advertising, email, or anything in any combination of these things. Those tools which we have become quite granular. It is increasingly difficult these days to avoid getting part of your personality, part of your belief system into the kind of content container. And to give a classic example of how all these things come together in terms of brand value, and this works the same whether you're a person, you're a company, or you're a brand, or you're just a country in itself. And the classic example here is Saudi Arabia. They've come in the news recently because of some activity they had in Turkey, which it doesn't kind of show they respect quite the way that human life is. And they, at the same time, are very active in having some technical conferences in their soil, invited countries, invited companies, and so on. Within days of that incident, Virgin Atlantic pulled out, Richard Branson pulled out from a deal worth $1 billion. Big tech corporations, which are going to attend that conference from the West, decided not to do it. Neighboring nations pulled out as well. So suddenly you saw the brand value of a country based on that specific decision in the real world, affecting it in the digital world and affecting its brand value and the way its soft power worked in the broader context. And I'm giving you this example because it's been in the news now and it's easy to actually check, but it's also, it works the same way whether you look at companies like Starbucks or Nike or Walmart or any of those companies that work in the web. How now do we square the circle of humanizing our digital presence consistently in everything we do? Now, we discussed that our primary motivation in everything is survival and energy conservation, and suddenly it sounds like the automated tools that we've had now require more effort, more work than ever before. And this is not really true, because the shortcuts which are available to us right now, the ones which we use in order to be able to save space, be human, connect in a real way, deliver value every time, are ultimately human ones. The first one is identity. Whether we are an individual, a brand, a company, or a country, we need to have a carefully worked out identity, a sense of selfhood, and a sense of agency. A sense of selfhood gives us values and it gives us principles. A sense of agency gives us intentions. And values, principles, and intentions translate to behavior. Again, we go from emotions to actions. And actions are always decided by choices and decisions. So we go from something which is intangible, what I believe in, what you believe in, how you feel about specific things, to purchasing decisions which you make, for instance, which is something hugely tangible. Whether I decide to give my money, whether it's $10 or $100, doesn't matter, to a particular brand. Whether I decide to share the content of a particular person. Whether I'm going to access the content of a particular newspaper, a particular company, and so on. So we go from selfhood and identity, which gives us agency, to those values and those activities which inform everything we do. And if we work that out precisely, in the past we used to have a partial of this. We used to have marketing personas where we worked on some kind of artificial idea of what the target audience was, and then we created content to meet the imaginary ideal needs of the target audience because we thought that's how we used to market. Now we have to work a little bit differently. We have to work out our own values, our own sense of identity, our own principles, and then work across all the different interfaces which we use to get those principles, values, and beliefs across. And if we do the job right, then they resonate with the audience at a very human level and begins to create the kind of connection that leads to the emotional response, which is a lot more positive than what we would get otherwise. Positive emotional responses then usually have positive outcomes, which we then dress logically. So if Craig, for instance, was selling something which I needed, and I thought I needed it, and he can't be the only person on the planet selling it. But because I like him, because I know him, I'm thinking, yeah, I'm going to get it from Craig because I know him, or because it's more convenient, or because I like the color of his sweatshirt, or because he sells it in a nice way. What justification I would give to myself is immaterial because the connection is there, which makes the decision. All right, let's take some questions on all this.
Thank you, David, for yet another interesting webinar. I'm sure we've got lots of questions. We've got a lot of people, talking on the live chat there. So, guys, on the live chat, make sure you get your questions over, and we will certainly put them over to David. You've got Gina, Zara, William Rock. There's loads of the old faces that I'm sure you are familiar with, David. So get your questions over. I will start off with some questions just now, David, because we want to take as much advantage of your brain as we possibly can in this short hour we're going to have. So the first question I've got here, how does the new view of the person supplied by the latest neuroscientific research change what marketers, brand experts, and SEOs should be doing?
Okay, that's a good one, essentially. Now, let's clarify what neuroscience tells us about the consumer right now. It tells us that essentially every decision we make is emotional, and it tells us then we justify that decision once we have made it by applying logic so that we can justify it in an articulate way. So marketing in the past used to connect in one or the other. It used to try and connect us very logically because it assumed we were rational beings. So it would say, hey, you know the jeans which you bought for $19.99? Well, they're $15.99. Surely it's a steal and you can't not buy them now, for instance. Or it used to connect with us entirely emotionally. This pair of jeans is going to make you irresistible to the opposite sex, for instance. So it used to be one or the other in a very sort of siloed way. And now we need to bring the two together. We need to bring logic and emotion in one area. We need to make them work. And we need to apply them in the same way that we would apply them in a face-to-face situation, so it actually makes sense. So to go back to the pair of jeans and say, hey, these jeans which make you look good, they're also cheaper this month. So that makes it an irresistible proposition, provided we're not lying, of course.
Perfect. Perfect. So the next question is from Kim in the YouTube chat. She's asking for, can you give us a specific example of how we can use social media, landing pages, and email marketing to humanize digital efforts?
Yes. Okay. Okay. I mean, the hard work goes behind the scenes. You need to work out every time that you do something, how that fits in with your personal view of the world. And that's the same, whether you're a company, whether you're a person, brand, or even a country. You have a specific worldview, which is driven by your needs and desires, and also your perception of what is out there, what other people are doing, how those people impact upon you, and then how you're going to impact back upon them in turn. Once you have that worked out, then every part of your presence is a fragment of the same thing. So there is consistency in the feeling it engenders. You may be talking about different things entirely, but the feeling is the same. And one classic and very successful example here is Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola worked very hard to create a very distinctive bottle and a very distinctive logo and a very distinctive font. And they worked on the principle that nobody should actually be able to see the bottle in its entirety or the font or the brand in order to feel what their brand is about. And then they worked really hard linking that with happiness. So the moment you see part of that, what do you feel? You don't say, oh, there's a sugary drink that might rot my teeth and it's not really good for slaking my thirst, but I'd like to get it anyway because it's sweet. You don't say that. Nobody says that. You just know that it makes you feel good. So when you get it, you think, well, it's Coca-Cola. I'm homesick. Or it's Coca-Cola. It reminds me of Christmas. Or it's Coca-Cola. It's fun. We say those things, which actually justify it. They've been very consistent in their branding, their message, and their emotional appeal. And many times, the honesty of their consistency is what we respond to.
Excellent, excellent, David. Just getting some other questions from YouTube here. I was just in the middle of looking at Jason's question, which I'm going to ask next. Jason is asking, with invasion of privacy so much in the news, aren't you worried about using the information that a customer gives into making a customer uncomfortable? Or is the generation that is worried about that simply going away or dying off, maybe? May have been a better way.
That's a multi-layered question, and I think it's so on point in terms of our times. So let's unpack it a little bit, Jason, and thank you for asking it. Now, first of all, we live in a time where we can gather more information about the people who interact with us than ever before, even if we never see them. They come on a website, we can see which page they landed on, sometimes what brought them there, what they did next, and so on and so on. And if they've created a profile of some kind, we can actually mine that even further. And the tendency has always been to say, yeah, we want more of that, because we feel that we can never have more information about the people we deal with in order to be able to persuade them to do what we want them to do as marketers, salespeople, and so on. The truth is, we don't need any of that. What we need is a connection, a real connection. We can connect with Mickey Mouse, some sort of avatar somebody has. And Mickey Mouse can come over and give us, $150 because he believes in what we do. So really, where's the personal connection there with Mickey Mouse and that, artificial avatar? It's in the belief that somebody actually values what you do sufficiently for them to give you $100. So that belief has nothing to do with data. It's underpinned by data, perhaps, but it's the emotional connection that's primary. So really here, indirectly, the answer to your question is we should be working really hard to understand the important aspects of what we do. We get lost in the hedges most of the time because we have so much information at our fingertips. We don't know where to start from. So we should say, what's really important? Why do people come to my website instead of 100,000 websites like any other? Why do people buy my product instead of 100,000 other products? Why would somebody come and buy the sniper mine, for instance, which, unique as it is, from my perspective, in the way I've written it, covers areas and aspects which you can get, another 10,000 books from academics, psychologists, even neuroscientists. And the answer to that is that right now you're listening to me, and if the connection is right, if I've persuaded you, you think, yeah, there's value in that. And that's exactly where the connection lies. So we don't need as much data as we think, but we do need to understand what those important points are. And usually the touch points are very human. And we need to think in a human fashion first, instead of a machine dictated fashion, simply because we have the tools that allow us to do so.
Thank you very much. The questions are coming in thick and fast here. You'll be glad to hear. So going back to when you were talking about personas, Amanda Smith is asking, do you consider personas obsolete now?
It's a good question. I don't consider anything obsolete. I think everything which we've been doing as marketers is still valid, but I think they're rightly deprecated, which means we can use them perhaps as a starting point, as an assumption, if we have nothing else to start off with. But it would be wrong to use them to the same extent that we used them in the past, because they almost became gospel. We used to think, our ideal customer is somebody called Joe, aged 23 to 35, does skiing, takes 3 holidays a year, is single, and has disposable income. And we used to monomaniacally market to that person. And I think that is a little bit dehumanizing and also patently artificial. And we need to somehow find ways to become real, even if the only connection we have is a digital one.
Apologies, I couldn't get my mute button off.
Okay.
My left hand wasn't working. So the next question is from Jeannie Hill, who is a regular on the show. So thanks again for the question, Jeannie. With conversational artificial intelligence, can you offer insights on training chatbots to make consumer emotion better?
Okay. Chatbots are an inescapable reality. We're going to see more and more of them. They're going to become better and better as algorithms and computing power constantly improve exponentially from year on year. And the question always is, I suspect, do we pretend they're people, or do we mark them as chatbots? I think by pretending they're people and presenting them as such, and a few companies I know actually do that, we are sending up false flags, raising expectations, which are only going to backfire. So having a clever chatbot, but actually introduces itself as a chatbot, almost like an artificial butler, and says, hi, I'm your artificial assistant here. I'm here to represent the company, and making it smart and cute and trying to humanize it actually has greater value in terms of the connection than trying to pretend that it isn't what it is. And I'm not sure if that answers exactly your question, but in their usage, we should be transparent, I suppose. That's what I'm saying.
Thank you, David. Next question is from William Rock. For small brands trying to increase that brand stickiness, say, for example, William is a bread maker, what can he do to engage better with his local customers?
Yeah. Let me know who you are. It's a simple thing. And that's the hardest thing, because this is not what you want to do. What you want to do is make bread, which you value, and then expect me to value it, when I can't, because I'm not a bread maker. I'm not an expert. I'm just a consumer. And in order for me to see the difference between what you do in the supermarket bread, you have to let me know the difference yourself. You have to catch my attention with your passion, your expertise, and the way that you're different. And if you do that, then I'll think, I'm going to get it from you as opposed to the supermarket. Sure, it's a little bit more in terms of my time, and it might be a little bit more in terms of the money I'll spend, but it has greater value because of all these things. And that, again, is an emotional response. We respond to somebody's passion, to somebody's life work, because we understand intuitively the value of that, and then we justify it with logic.
Thank you, and hopefully, William, if you get into the bread making industry, that answers your question. So there's another great question here from Paula. Hopefully I've said that right. Hopefully I've not offended anyone. How do you convince a business that is focused in quantitative data rather than the emotional connection they build with their customers to think about behavioural marketing and that there's value in behavioural marketing?
That's an excellent question. The question always is, what does the data represent? Sure, the data is numbers and figures and so on, but what does it actually represent? What is it there to do? It is there to give us a granular understanding of reality. And that reality is made up by people, their motivation, their choices, and their decisions. And no amount of data, and there's a fluidity in all this that makes it really difficult. So we're constantly chasing some kind of moving goalpost if we're only using data to connect. So really, in order to connect, we need that human connection, because that human connection has that flexibility which allows us to get the ROI we need. So the choices are, in a data-driven world, we constantly find new ways to get more and more data. Then the data itself becomes a problem. Then we need to put in layers of pre-processing and layers of post-processing. And then we need to find more computing power to process it better. And then we need to put in predictive analytics. We need to do all those things, which is expense, which does what? It reduces the margins, which makes the ROI which we are chasing harder to chase. Or we can say, hey, people come to us because they love us. It's simple as that. And that is really difficult to do.
Thank you for that answer, David, as always. Next question. The digital domain is made up of two layers. One is human and the other one is machine-based. The former is driven by emotion, the latter by logic and mathematics. How do we reconcile the two?
Yes, that's a brilliant question. Okay. How do we drive? We drive on a road, which is basically physics, in vehicles which are driven by physics, and they obey strict physical laws. We can't make them do anything which physics won't allow. But that's not how we drive. This is the enabling thing. We drive as individuals. We drive very emotionally. And we are seeing now, and I'm going to use driving as an analogy because it actually works really well, that when we are on the road, we don't just focus on our own behavior because we all want to get from A to B like everybody else. We also focus on the behavior of everybody around us. And we adjust because we constantly make mistakes. We don't keep to our lane. We don't keep the speed limit. We may take a turn without indicating, so on. And those people around us may also do the same thing. So driving, arguably the most solitary of activities, is actually hugely communal. And if we could get the neuroscientific signature of our brains in that context, we'd find that we're all in tune with each other, which is why we can make such allocations for each other's slightly deviant behavior in terms of proper driving technique. Bring in a brand new driver who doesn't have those skills, who doesn't have the kind of mindset. What do? They stick to the rules. What does that make them? It makes them dangerous because they can't predict our unpredictability. So to get back to, how do we reconcile those two things? Well, we have magnificent tools in terms of how we actually optimize web pages, set up web pages, track behavior, track performance, use analytics to make certain predictions about how things will go and so on. But at the same time, what makes the page valuable is the content that resonates with the audience. And that's not mechanical, that's human. We have to think, what's really valuable to my audience? Not a keyword that brought them there. That's valuable to me to bring them there, but that's not valuable to them. It has to be a specific thing that it enables them to do. It enables them to do something a lot easier. It gives them that shortcut in their lives. And if we do that, then we actually are a winning formula.
Cheers. So the next question for you, David, we'll just go through as many as we can. We've only got 15 minutes left. So anyone else get any other questions, ask them. But the next question is, while the new research shows that we make consumer decisions differently, does anything really change or need to change from a practical point of view in our marketing branding?
Yes. Okay, and that's really good, because in marketing, and generally anybody working in the digital domain would tend to chase the new shiny because we have the idea that it will give us that shortcut which we crave, which will give us a good ROI for a lot less energy and ensure our survival. This is our psychological motivation. So we tell ourselves, it's going to save us a lot of trouble, so we need to do it. At the same time, we need to also understand that as we chase the new things, the things of the past which had value continue to have value, and we must find some way to integrate and adapt in a bigger whole. And here's the example. We live in a digital domain right now. We can buy almost anything at any time from companies across the world. We don't have to be physically in their stores, don't have to be physically in our country. We don't even use the same currency. We can buy anything we'd like. We only do so when we feel that the people we're buying from in that context of the purchasing decision actually have some kind of real existence, real lives, real values behind them. And if we don't feel that connection, then we tend not to trust them, or we tend not to want to do business with them. So that's the way, moving forward with all those tools at our fingertips, all the massive digitization, all those changes, the things which were of value continue to be of value. They have to be part of the granular whole that gives us a better idea of who people are and what they do.
Thank you. Next question is from Gina Fidel. So Gina is saying, knowing who we are as a fundamental makes so much sense. There's a loop between ours, clients and customers' identity, and each inform the other symbiotically. One doesn't exist without the other. How can we make it feel less daunting for our clients to do the necessary introspection?
Well, that is such a simple question, right? And it has such a hard answer. It's very difficult to make anybody do anything. So the only way we can get people to do what we want is the same way that they get us to do what they want, is to frame it in a way that allows us to see each other's point of view, and also to allows us to understand that we work within the same framework. So, for example, let's go to the example of Craig selling a product, where he sells a product, and suppose I don't know him, and I can get a product from anywhere else in the web. So there's no real need for me to actually get a product from him. But if I know him, as a person, what do I understand in the back of my mind? That person has needs, has a family, he needs to survive, he has some sort of financial stake in what he's doing. And although he's doing this and I like him, and he's selling it, there's all those other things behind it. So when it comes to say, can I get it from Craig or can I get it from Amazon? Well, I think, okay, I get so many things from Amazon, I'll get this from Craig. So that's a conscious decision which I make. But I make it because of that human connection. And I make that because within that framework, I understand all those things either explicitly or implicitly. How this happens is part of the conversation, the connection. But it has to happen. If it doesn't happen, expecting somebody to actually get it, I think is a false expectation.
I'm going to start selling stuff now, David.
Awesome.
So, anyway, we've got another question from Petro. So Petro is saying, how would you overcome putting your life in danger with an emotional connection? Petro lives in Cape Town, South Africa, and has a company that sells golf and safari holidays. The biggest threat is people think that there's only crime that happens in South Africa, and may not choose to buy because of that.
Okay, that's again, I think that's an awesome question, because it plays upon perception, and perception creates reality. The perception is, quite rightly, that South Africa is a dangerous place, because if you're living anywhere like the UK or Europe or suspect the States, the only things you see coming out of South Africa are press-worthy crime cases or crime statistics and so on. And they're not good, so you're right. So how do we bridge that gap? How do we actually say, hey, this is not the only thing that happens in South Africa? Well, clearly the first one is that human connection which allows the conversation to take place. So if you're just a company selling things, for instance, it makes it harder. But if you a company that's humanized in some way, that makes it a lot easier. The other thing is to also to understand how perception is actually formed. Perception requires three things. It requires memories, it requires experience, and then it requires knowledge. So those three things actually make it. So when we create a perception of South Africa in this instance, you've got to think, let's say you're talking about me, my perception of it is formed because the only memories I have, I've never been there, are what I've seen in the news. The only experience I have is, in this case, I'm talking to you. And the only knowledge I have are Wilbur Smith books, which I've read in the past, which completely romanticized it. So, if we take those three things together, now my perception begins to change based on those three things. And understanding the elements that form perception allows us gradually to put in place the information or the precepts that are required to change it. So the fact that you just said what you said, a light bulb goes off in my head. I'm thinking, okay, crime can happen in every single corner of South Africa. Sure, we might have a problem, but so do many other countries. So clearly that changes the conversation. It changes my perception, which changes my attitude towards you. And that's a kind of marketing that you need to lead with.
Excellent answer as always, David. It was a tricky question as well, given you've not been to South Africa. I've also got the same perception. It's just a bad place, and I wouldn't go out if I was there. Yeah. But obviously, we need to be wary of what we believe as well. But anyway, the next question is: marketeers still rely on some of the old methods of influencing consumers, discounts, competition, giveaways, and all that kind of stuff. Should they now be retired? If yes, why?
Well, no. I mean, like SEO, there are techniques which go back in the very early days of SEO. Keywords being case in point, and they still play a role. It's just they don't play as much of a role. Everything that forms some kind of connection with your audience plays a task. When the channel is constrained, it rises in prominence. So for instance, if we had no words right now to communicate, but we still had a picture, I'd be holding up some piece of paper with a picture or a single word drawn in it. And that's how we would communicate. Imperfect as a medium would be, it would give tremendous importance to either my ability to draw or my ability to write a single word very quickly and then do it again over and over again until we communicate. When we have this multi-layered, semantically dense kind of connection, then that still plays a role. I can still, have a picture which I can hold up, or put up a PowerPoint presentation, or put up a word. But also you want to see how I'm dressed, how I talk, how I behave, what my expressions are, what the inflection of my voice is, and so on and so on. So now the signals become a lot more densely layered, and the importance of the previous ones becomes a little bit deprecated. And that's exactly the same thing we're seeing in search with SEO. It's exactly the same thing we're seeing in marketing in terms of the return on investment from singular, very focused and siloed marketing channels. They don't work anymore. Television and so on, the advert, slick as it may be, doesn't really work anymore. But if you dress it up with other things, if you present it differently, then even something like an advert can be made to work. And a classic case in point. Let's think about two examples really, which are very vivid. The first one is the John Lewis advert, which comes out at Christmas every year. It's a John Lewis partnership in the UK. It's always very human. It's always very emotional. There's a huge buzz goes on around it, and it barely mentions them. It's just associated with them. It's become a tradition, and the buzz and everything else around it, the secrecy and so on, they become part of the envelope, let's call it that, which creates the connection, which is multi-layered because we understand the values and so on. Another classic example which turned the advert on its head is when Mercedes-Benz brought out the invisible car, which was a car that had zero or near zero carbon footprint. And how do you advertise that? Well, traditionally, what would you do? You bring out a car. If you're really traditional, you put a sexy looking girl next to it, and then you give me all the technical characteristics. And it doesn't work. Okay, we don't respond to that anymore. So what did they do? They hired a group of artists and scientists. They covered the car in Velcro, and they used LED lights and cameras to basically project what was on one side of the car on screens on the other. So the car became virtually invisible. And then they gave us the advert, and then they gave us another YouTube video which explained how they did it. And that was amazing because that connected, we connected with the company and they remember the car. And that was like 2-3 years ago. So it's some time since it happened. But it still sticks to mind. And it's a classic example of doing things differently, still using same techniques, but in a different way.
Thank you, David. Yeah, I think we've just got to evolve with our tactics.
Yes.
And embrace the change. But the next question is, what are the new methods of marketing and branding that we should be applying? And are there any examples that we should be looking at?
Yeah, I mean, we live now in an information-rich environment. We have podcasts, we have written material, we have blog posts, we have social media platforms, we have our own websites, we have advertising, we have paid and organic search. I mean, there's a multitude of things. We should be using them all, and we should be finding ways to create a kind of consistency across the board. And the examples I've just given about the John Lewis partnership and Mercedes-Benz and their invisible car, and I would urge both, I would urge you to check both on YouTube to see what the buzz is about. They're classic examples of essentially old marketing done in a new way, and it's used to create transparency in the way the company operates. They're not hiding the fact they're creating marketing or an advert even, but they're doing it in a way that projects their values, creates a little bit of entertainment, but more than that, it creates that emotional connection, which engenders an emotional response, which then leads to everything else.
Perfect. So we have 5 minutes left, so there's still time for any other questions from you guys watching. We still have time for probably 3 or 4 more answers from David. I'm going to ask you Kim's next question. So Kim is someone on YouTube, and she is asking, for a small company providing technical services, how do you suggest that they create the best connection with potential customers?
Okay, the question would be, why are you doing it? And it's not enough for you to tell me, well, I need to earn money to live, because we're all trying to do that. So you need to tell me why you're doing what you're doing. What is it actually makes you excited about your work? And if you answer that question honestly, then the challenge is, how do you then show that in your connection with your potential customers? How do you show that excitement? How do you show that commitment? How do you show the difference which makes you who you are? Show me who you are, and I respond to it. We are biologically, evolutionary programmed to respond to people and their passion, their emotions, and their values. This is something which is ingrained in us. We don't have to think about it. The difference is that now in a digital environment, everything we do is intentional. So everything we do has to be created. In a person-to-person environment, we don't have a choice. You can't really disguise your voice. You can't really disguise your body's mannerisms. You can't, really hide the color of your eyes or the expressions of your face. All those things are things that people respond to. But in a digital world, you can become entirely artificial because everything else around us is artificial. So we have to find ways to use the artificiality of the connection to create a sense of realness in who we are.
Spot on answer. I certainly get a lot of plaudits myself when I'm talking at webinars or seminars for standing out from the crowd, being myself. Whether that's being the crazy tattooed guy or whatever, it's got to stand out from the crowd. So and yeah, people will buy into it, or they'll hate your guts for it, but more people will like you for it than not. But there you go. So the next question is, we constantly talk about new marketing, new SEO, new branding. What happens to the old way of doing these things, and why are we constantly in iterations of these new elements?
Okay, that's excellent. Well, we're constantly chasing the new because we are constantly hoping, and this is part of our motivation to do anything, to find the shortcut that will give us the ROI we need in terms of energy expended and gains made. we are hardwired for this. You know, we've been talking in search now since 2012. We're saying that with semantic search, there are no shortcuts. What do we get in every single webinar that I go to, every single conference, every talk I give? What are the new shortcuts? Everybody somehow is hoping for the silver bullet made up from specialized knowledge and insight that will give them a competitive advantage. Now, logically, you think, well, it can't exist. If it did, why would a person give it to me anyway? They'd be using it themselves. But we keep hoping that there'll be something because that's why we're there. This is why we're here. You know, you're hoping I will say something that will make a light bulb go off in your head. They'll make you go away and do things a little bit differently and give you better return. So we're saying new because something new has come in, the horizons have opened, the dynamic has changed, and we need a new way of thinking about it. But it's not really new, it's just more challenging. It's more complex, if you like. It's more multi-layered. It's like the world has got bigger. So a small tribe of 50 people where we all knew each other and knew how to trade with each other suddenly became 10 times that. So suddenly, oh, this is a new reality. Well, no, it's just a more challenging reality. It's just as real as the old reality. So what we did in the past before the internet came along was we had to work out very carefully the location of our business and its value proposition. And if we didn't do that, it was dead in the water. You know, the best business in the world situated on top of a mountain had no people, and the best business in the world that was bad at saying why it was so good had no people. So we actually did that. Digital came along, it made some things easier, it gave us a potential, and I stress the word potential, access to the entire world. And we thought, oh, the entire world is our audience. No, it isn't. You're still looking for your audience in the potentiality of, you know, how many people are online? About 6 billion people. So you're looking for the 1,000, 5,000, 10,000 people that actually are your customers. And that goes again for the earlier question we had about the small technical business. How do you project yourself? Well, you're not selling to everybody. You're selling far and wide, but you're looking to sell to those people who are your customers, who will respond to your emotional message, who will respond to what you do, and will actually agree to do business with you. And that's what you're looking for. That hasn't changed. So new is in terms of scale, it's bigger, it's more complicated, but it's still driven by the old values.
Thank you, David. Sadly, we are out of time. It's 1 minute past 6. A quick, I'm not going to ask you a question, but 360 Magnetic Solutions were responding, put a statement out there. Is that something that they can tweet you? Because Zara Altier was looking for you to respond to the statement you made. So if you guys could maybe do that on Twitter or whatever, just while people are disappearing from the webinar before Anton kills me for going over time. If you guys could maybe do that on Twitter, just so that Zara can get her answer and you can respond to the statement. And can you tell guys where else they can get you, David? Can they get you on Twitter? If anyone else has got any questions or...
Yes, definitely. Find me on Twitter at David Amerland. You can find me on my website, davidamerland.com. I'm on LinkedIn, and I'm beginning to respond more to questions there. I never used to in the past because it's not much of the tradition of LinkedIn, but I am responding to them. If you ask, I will answer. And as long as G+ is up, I'm still there for now.
Excellent, excellent. So thank you again for everyone for attending today. Thank you, David, for allowing me to be your host. It's been eventful again and another learning curve. So thank you once again for involving me.
Thank you for having me. It's been brilliant.
Cheers. Thanks, guys.